All right, let's look into Angular static site generation using Scully. So I was looking into creating a blog and also some documentation purely powered by Markdown, and kind of integrate that with an existing Angular application. Sure, I mean, I've been a long time Hugo user. Heck, my blog is powered by Hugo. So having that kind of live inside my Angular application would be okay. But still, I was looking for something that integrates with Angular. Plus, it's 2020. There should be something out there. Plus, Jamstack is here to stay. So, and Jamstack is very popular now, and there's a lot of different options out there. So I looked into Gatsby, Docusaurus, Next.js, Nux.js, 11t. Finally, I discovered Scully. Okay, so where can you find Scully? Scully is at Scully.io. And this is their landing site. And, as they promise, it's the best static site generator for Angular. And it's the first of its kind. And they promise it's wicked fast. The pages I found really interesting and most useful are the getting started ones with the prerequisites. Just make sure you have gone over these. We will cover them during the tutorial. And the getting started and how to create a blog. Right, these are some of the main pages. Look into the configuration as well. I'm sure you'll figure out things that I haven't. But there you go. This is the Scully doc site. So I started taking it for a test drive. What's the use case, right? Like for me, it was adding it to an application. But if I was just using a static website, I mean, it would work even better. It's just a static site. So what do you need to get started, right? So let's just go over this. I'm just referring my blog post, and let's look into what we need to get started and do something and test drive it. So first off, have the system tooling that you need. npm, just install the npx for just running binaries directly. Have nvm, so you can switch between various node versions. So these are all prerequisites that I highly recommend as tooling for your system. Also have the Angular CLI installed globally, and then just get started creating a new Angular application. So try the usual ng new application name. So make sure when you create the application, you add routing along with it. But if you don't, if you missed it, you can always add the routing module after the fact using this command, ng generate module app routing, keep it flat, and then the name of the module. So what it would look like is something like this, app routing module that comes along with it. I'm just going to expand this and we'll go into the details shortly. There is also an alternative method for creating what we just did with like a single line one-shot command. Where you can use the npx binary to leverage the next version of the Angular CLI and use the ng command or the CLI to create a new application called blog post demo. At this point, we can now add the Scully module, add the Scully package to your application. And the command to use would be ng add scully.io/init. And what this would do is add the Scully module to your app module. So line number 24 right here, and then line number 6 would be automatically added. At this point, we're ready to add the various modules that you need for blogging and documentation. So what we'll do here is we'll use the schematic that Scully has provided to initialize a blog module and also create a blog folder to put in our markdown files. So to do that, you just need to run this command, ng generate Scully IOs init/init, the scope package, and use the blog schematic to two things. One, create the blog folder, and two, to create the blog module and add it to your application. So this would look like this. It would add the blog folder and also the blog module with the starter components. And it would add the blog directory on top right here. This would also create a Scully configuration TS file where it would add the slug of what you just created. It would add the route of what you just created. In this case, it's blog, and the slug is just called slug by default. And here you specify the folder. So if the route is blog whack slug, then the content will be served from this folder, blog, and the type of this slug is a content folder. It's just a flat directory. Similarly, if you want to add more modules, in my case, I wanted to add a docs module. I would use a different schematic called markdown, and you would go through the interactive command prompt where you can specify the slug. In this case, I provided doc. The folder name in this case was docs, and the name of the module, which was also docs in my case. And that would provide you with this. So we have a docs module, and we also have the docs folder on top where I can put my markdown files. To make the application look a little nicer, let's just add Angular material to it. So you can do that by adding the Angular material package using the add command, and we'll leverage this shortly using the add command. So let's add a few markdown files to each of our modules, the blog module and the docs module. You can do this by leveraging the post schematic in Scully and specifying the name of the post in line, or you can just run the post schematic and respond to the interactive prompts to create markdown files in each of those folders. So in my case, I've created a couple markdown files in each of these folders. We have 4 files in total and 2 each. Now let's set up some rendering layouts, basically like a navigation. So it looks a little nicer on your application with a left navigation showing the 2 different modules with their routes. So you can lazy load those modules when you route to it. So how do we do that? So use the navigation schematic in Angular material and generate a main navigation. It would set up a lot of placeholder boilerplate code for your navigation that you need to make it look and feel Angular material. In my case, I've just massaged it to add these 2 links, the router link blog and the router link docs. And if you remember the routing module for our application, we are lazy loading these 2 modules when those paths are triggered in blog and docs. At this point, we need to set up the blog component and the docs component to list the various markdown files in those modules and folders. So the way we're going to set this up is by using a little bit of a filter on the route itself, but primarily we need the Scully route service. So in the component for the blog, let me pull it up on the screen here, right here. So we inject the Scully route service, and that has all the routes across the Scully modules. And this is understood because it's configured in the config file. And you can do the filtering in either the markup or you can do it in the TypeScript itself. I'm showing you 2 different examples where you get the routes that are available and only show the ones on the page that are part of the blog module, basically which have a blog route in them, or docs module, which have a docs route in them. The routing module for the blog and the docs is also auto-generated, and it kind of looks like this. It has a path for the blog and it has a path for the slug. So we'll do the same for the docs component, and you can see it right here. It's very similar. And just to ensure we cover it, let's look at the route. Let's look at the markup itself. And to note, the Scully content is very important, because when the route is triggered and as configured in the Scully config file, the Scully config TS, there needs to be a space for the content, and that is exactly what this component does. The Scully content, it takes the markdown and then processes it and makes sure it renders as HTML. And now, friends, it is time to build and serve the application. How do you do that? The step-by-step process is pretty much you build the application and then you run Scully to build the assets, the static assets that we need, because it is static site generation. Once they are built, you can cd into the distribution directory and start your 0 server or HTTP server. Alternatively, Scully also provides a convenient flag or subcommand where you can serve basically they give a web server to serve the static content. And this is pretty convenient. So using this, I've created 3 different versions for prod and all, 3 different NPM scripts in my package.json, and we'll just go ahead and run them. So the one I'm going to use right now is the Scully all, which basically does the build, builds the Scully assets and serves it up. So let's go ahead and run it. So it provides 2 ports, where one is the actual Angular application running. If you go into that one, it doesn't know how to parse the content, so you just kind of bulk. But the other link, which is the static server, that has the ability to parse the content. So you have the list blog module shown in the blog route, and if you click the listing, you would see those markdown files processed and rendered. And just to show, and let's take another look at it. So the blog module is triggered, and you see the 2 blog posts, and the docs module is triggered, and you see the 2 docs posts. I want to mention a few other notes here. In addition to using the interactive prompts, if you just want to give a markdown file creation in a single line, you can just do this. You can just provide a name of the module, the slug right here, which is part of the route, and the source directory where you place your markdown files, and the actual route itself. They can all be similar, same, or they can all be different. It's totally up to you. I do want to mention a few shortcomings. So ideally you want to have like 2 separate components. In this case, let me show you. For both the routes, I'm using the same component. I tried using different components for like the listing page and the detail page. It just didn't quite work right. I'm not sure if there was a conflict between the config TS and then the actual Angular router. It just wasn't working right. So hopefully this will be resolved in the future, or maybe I'll figure out a way to do it. But I want to make sure I mention this in the screencast. The other shortcoming is, as you saw in some renderings, it just shows, even in the static site, it shows the inability to not parse the static content. It's kind of like not the best experience. And I don't know if I'm sure everything is surmountable technically, but this could be better. I'm sure it'll be fixed by our Scully folks in the future. I've also gone ahead and mentioned all the references that I've used. And thank you so much for all the developers and content creators for these references. Totally appreciated.